Hey everybody, welcome back for another game break. Today I'm going to be talking about Grandia 2 for a tribute review. Now, for the Grandia series in particular, it was the first two games that really had a lasting impact on me as a gamer. So this will be the last Grandia game I talk about for a while. I would love to maybe do Grandia 3 sometime in the future, but that largely depends on if it gets a modern release or not. And I only did play it once, but I do remember enjoying it quite a bit, so I would love to tackle it again. Anyway, I digress. We're here to talk about Grandia 2, so let's give it the tribute it deserves. And if you've watched my previous tribute review, you know the drill by now. This will be chock full of spoilers, so please leave if you don't want to be spoiled. Otherwise, stick around and enjoy the ride. Very soon after Grandia 2 starts, it becomes easily apparent that this is going to be a very different game than the original was. It's dark, it's bloody, it's foreboding, and the Grandia team does a great job of tackling the dark elements of this game. And because the Grandia team was able to handle the dark elements of the original so well, I was more than happy to have a dark story from them right at the onset. And plus, this game has one of my favorite character relationships ever in an RPG, and it has one of the most tragic moments in an RPG, for me personally at least, that I can remember, and it's always stuck with me, and it hit me again just as hard this time around. As many of you probably already know, Grandia 2 was originally released for the Sega Dreamcast, and then it was ported over to the PlayStation 2. I actually first played it on the PlayStation 2, but not having any frame of reference at the time for bad ports or whatever, it didn't bother me. Looking back now, with 2020 vision, I can obviously see the PS2 version was inferior to the Dreamcast, but I still absolutely loved the game to death on the PS2 version, and that is just a testament to how great the game is, that I loved it so much, and it was an inferior version. But anyway, having said that, Grandia 2 definitely, by today's standards, probably has what many consider outdated graphics, but it did just get an HD treatment for PC and the Nintendo Switch, and the art style of the game allows the graphics to hold up incredibly well, and they are really able to shine on modern platforms, making the world an absolute pleasure to traverse through. Along with the change in graphics from sprites to 3D and the change to a darker narrative, the character art also has changed for this game. There's new character artists this time around, and through his work, the character art is a bit more gritty, fitting with the darker tone of the story. And it does work very well for this game, but I will admit that I do miss the character portraits from the original a little bit, just because I feel like there was a bit more variety to them. And because of said variety, it was able to portray character emotions a bit better than this game was. However, in terms of variety, Grandia 2 does have a lot more FMV cutscenes than the original game did. And for the time when the game was released, these cutscenes were very much top of the line, cutting edge, and they are still very pleasurable to look at today. And some of them hold up incredibly well. My favorite ones in particular are the ones that take place in outer space between Granis's fleet and Valmar's fleet, and them just going to absolute town on one another. And it just looks really cool. And the fact that Granis's fleet has ships shaped like swords is pretty fucking cool, and he definitely gets some bonus points in my book for it. A welcome addition to Grandia 2 versus the original game is the fact there are difficulty modes this time around. Simply just normal mode or hard mode. But I really did welcome the addition of hard mode because it gave the game that little bit of a difficulty bump that I was craving. And it particularly made boss fights a little bit more challenging and a little bit more fun. In terms of difficulty, this game can be on the easy side of the spectrum, even on hard mode. I found that just simply traversing through a given area and fighting the enemies I encountered, I would almost say overpowered by the end of the game because everything was just got to be an absolute cakewalk, especially for just random enemy encounters. Boss encounters did still provide a bit of a challenge, but nothing to really sweat about generally. But I will say the fact that, this game doesn't need you to grind at all really helps with the game's flow and pacing. So that's definitely a plus. But even though this game could potentially be on the easy side for experienced RPG players in particular, that's not to say that the game isn't fun, because the game is incredibly fun. It's one of the best battle systems ever made. I have played Grandia 1 and 2 many times, so I know the combat system quite well. And I just finished playing the first Grandia, so I'm not currently relearning the battle system, so of course it's not going to be as difficult for me. I remember my first time playing both the Grandia games. I did find them a little bit more difficult, absolutely, because I had to learn the in and outs of it. So, difficulty can be a subjective thing, but for me personally, being an experienced player, I did find it on the easy side. And as opposed to the original game, there is no slog at the beginning of this one. You're not spending 3 or 4 hours just trying to get into the game's story and meeting characters. Right at the beginning of Grandia 2, you're thrust right into the heart of the story. You're acquainted with the major players pretty much, and you meet all of your party members fairly quickly. And having a full party just allows you to enjoy all the in and outs of the combat system much earlier on, and it just makes it more enjoyable. One thing I can say without a shadow of a doubt is combat in Grandia 2 is vastly improved over the original game. Command prompts in general are executed much more quickly, plus you have the addition of skill books in this game. Skill books are a great addition to this game because the myriad skills contained within them allow you to customize your party members to fulfill certain roles, such as tanking or healing or DPS, and these can be changed on the fly, so you can switch whatever role a character has whenever you want. Magic, unlike the original game, can also be equipped and unequipped from any character at any given time. This obviously giving you way more flexibility and customization options for characters in terms of what magical skills you want them to have. Special moves and magical abilities in this game are learned in a much more streamlined and user-friendly fashion than the original game. In the original game, we had to level up specific elements and specific weapons in order to learn skills. But in this game, we are simply given magic coins and skill coins, and we're able to spend them at our leisure. This results in a reduction of micromanagement, as you do not constantly have to keep an eye on weapon levels or element levels. Some people will like this change to the leveling system. Some people will obviously hate it. Obviously, people who like min-maxing their stats will miss this type of system, but for me personally, I like not having, to micromanage everything quite so much, and I like just being able to go into the menu whenever I want and to spend the magic coins and skill coins I've accumulated for my character's skills and abilities. But one thing I will say about this game versus the original that does slow it down a little bit is some of the magical abilities in this game in particular can take a very long time to cast in terms of the animations for these abilities. So it can really affect the game's flow, but I will say a lot of them do look pretty cool, especially the explosion element magic in this game. And having said that, here's a quick example of a couple of my favorite spells. Big Boom always seemed to me like that someone dropped something in a lake of nitroglycerin and it just explodes. That's my takeaway anyway. And then the other one, Meteor, I just always loved the comic effect of having a small meteor crushed by an even bigger one to eventually land on top of the enemy's head. And while combat in Grandia 2 has been improved and it is a more smooth experience, it is still very much the same system used in the original game. It uses the IPS gauge, as it should, because it's a great battle system. And like the original game, there's very much an emphasis on canceling enemy attacks with critical hits. You are still able to see what moves enemies have planned for you, so you can plan accordingly. And you can see who they are targeting. So it still allows for a strategic approach to combat. And while I do miss the great sprite work of the original game. I do like the battle animations in Grandia 2 almost just as much as the original, and a lot of them are really fun to watch. So since I did it for the first game, I feel like I cannot not do it for the second, so here's a battle montage. I really do like making those battle montages for you, and I hope you all enjoy watching them as much as I do making them. Just like the original Grandia, towns are simple and pleasant to explore, and navigation in this game is quite basic as well. However, unlike the original game, there are no map points this time around, which give you a bird's eye view of the area you're currently in. You only have the compass this time, and the compass, unlike the original game, can be toggled to point you towards specific locations. And while the navigation system is very simple, it's all that's really needed for this game. And within towns and cities, talking to NPCs can be just as rewarding as the original game, as they offer a lot of world building for you to enjoy and pleasant character interactions between party members. The map system in Grandia 2 also is identical to the original game. There is no overworld to explore. You just have kind of a paper map and you're able to pick locations to go to. And it works fine for this game, but one thing the original did have over Grandia 2 was some side areas to explore. The original Grandia had about 3 side areas for you to go to enjoy combat and accumulate new items, whereas Grandia 2 only has 1, and that one area is only really a rehash of an area you've already explored. So this game is a bit more linear than the original. Now, one thing this game does have that the original didn't is the addition of the granite cliffs. And the granite cliffs are great fissures in the world that essentially split it apart. And because of these cliffs, you get to ride on a ship called the 50-50. Now, what does that mean? It means exactly what you think it means. It means when you go on this ship, you have pretty much a 50% chance of living or dying. And I cannot believe that Ryudo and crew got on this boat without asking what that name meant first. It's gotta be the worst name for a ship ever, but it does lead to some pretty comedic moments for the party, I will say. It's time to talk at length about this game's characters and story, because it's a large part of what makes the game so great. So to start off with, we'll talk about Ryudo. Straight up, Ryudo, you can't even argue with me on this one. He's a fucking asshole. He really is. But he's our asshole, and we love him. Even though Ryudo is a jerk, he does begin to warm slowly throughout the course of the game, but the asshole is with him for a large part of it. The fact he is constantly looked down upon for his profession does not do anything to improve his mood, and it doesn't help his attitude towards people at large. Ryudo is a cynical grouch. He calls bullied kids wusses, and he constantly expresses how he has no interest in women. It's funny he says that, because he gets involved with a woman that has the worst case of multiple personality disorder I have ever seen. So I guess it serves him right for talking like that. But having said all that, I do like Ryudo for the fact that he will be the first guy to tell you to fuck off if he thinks you're wrong. Even though Ryudo is a cranky guy, he does have a breaking point when it comes to the amount of suffering that's occurring around him. Ryudo is eventually able to break free of his apathy, and it's something I appreciated watching. Because breaking free of one's apathy can be a real struggle, so I always appreciate seeing characters struggling past it and learning to give it down. In addition to Ryudo, we are also quickly acquainted with Elena at the beginning of the story. She is very much the stereotypical good egg in terms of personality. Elena very much wants to help everyone and always do the right thing at all times. So this naturally leads to some conflict with Ryudo because Elena and Ryudo have very different perspectives when it comes to human nature. I did find it difficult to empathize with Elena sometimes just because she is so naive and she is such a devout believer in her faith. But I did appreciate her conflict of faith later on in the game, as I am sure it is very difficult for someone to question their own faith. I'm sure it can be a very difficult experience to grapple with. However, with Elena being a songstress, she does get some very pleasant melodies in the game to listen to. And then fairly quickly into the game, we get to meet Millennia, who, to put it mildly, is a bit of a pistol. And she constantly enjoys fucking with both Ryudo and Elena throughout the entire journey. A perfect example of her tormenting them both is when she kisses Ryudo, only to quickly switch back into Elena just in order to fuck with their feelings for one another. And I will give her kudos, that was a dirty, dirty move, but it fits her character. I did like Millennia's more brash nature because it consistently led to interesting party interactions, and she was a consistent scene stealer throughout the journey. Plus, she gets some major credit for having the best looking special attack in the whole game. So in the years since beating Grandia 2, I have seen some criticism for the game's story, particularly for the fact that it plays off the light versus dark trope. But I gotta say, I really like what Grandia 2 did with it. This game takes the classic light versus dark trope and gets gritty with it. I was fascinated with the concept of a wounded god in the form of Granus, the god of light, and how he was being threatened by the rise of his rival, the dark god Valmar. I also really liked the concept that Granus, even though he was the god of light, was not a wholly good deity, with it being implied in the game that he sought unending devotion from his subjects. And the fact that Valmar, depending on your perspective, could be viewed as a good god because he very much rose in opposition to the absolute authority that was Granus and his followers, in order to liberate the people from slavery, essentially. I'm very much curious what Valmar was like in the past, but we don't get to see it in this game, as his will is supplanted by the main antagonist, Zera. And this being a JRPG, you just fucking know, if there is a major organized religion in it, and it looks like Christianity, it's probably gonna be an antagonist. And that is very much what happens in this game. And the one thing Grandia 2 does with that is they're not super coy about that fact. It becomes readily apparent very early on in the game. As soon as you meet the upper leadership of the church, they're a bunch of overzealous, hypocritical douchebags. For example, as soon as you meet the High Priestess Selene, she talks about burning villages and purges. And very much unlike the original Grandia, the villains in Grandia 2 have much more of a demanding presence and are to be taken more seriously. Selene, for example, is just an awful human being. Like, watch her slap this poor distraught mother. What a piece of shit. But our main man Ryudo doesn't give a shit about religion, so he doesn't mind being a heretic, which I am all for. Here's a perfect example of him not giving a shit about the church when he's a dick to the Pope. Seriously, look at what he says. Not vague enough for me? Can you be a little less specific? If I didn't love Ryudo so much, I would think he's the biggest dick ever. But I think he's totally justified in his behavior, especially after seeing how shady the church actually is. And when it's actually time to fight these asshats, it's so satisfying.
Fuck the police!
Quick little segue here. I've mentioned how in the Grandia games that talking to NPCs in towns or villages can be very rewarding from a world building or character development standpoint. And that's very much true for this game, especially in one specific instance, and that's how it affected my feelings towards the game's villains. During the course of the game, you encounter an estranged father and son who are trying to mend their relationship long distance. And just as the Church of Grandia goes full crazy and shows its true colors, they kill the father just as him and his son are about to repair their estranged relationship. And for me personally, it made me hate the church that much more that I couldn't wait to tear them apart. And it was just that much more satisfying when I actually did. Now, as much as Ryudo is a lovable asshole, and I did enjoy watching his love triangle play out with Elena and Millennia, the best relationship in this game and the most enjoyable one to watch is the one between Tio and Merrick. Tio and Merrick's relationship is purely platonic. It's a father-daughter relationship, but it is the most compelling relationship in the whole game. Tio's complete lack of emotion and total inability to make decisions for herself is fascinating to watch because of her relationship with Merrick. Merrick is constantly providing a wise guiding hand, and he consistently displays a genuine interest in her well-being. When I would watch Tio and Merrick interact, I would constantly feel that he genuinely cared about her. One of the cute little scenes in this game that I really appreciated is when you're all eating together, you can see that Tio mimics Merrick in terms of how he eats his food. This scene definitely gave me the impression of a little kid looking up to their parent and just wanting to emulate everything about them because they think their parent's their hero. And it doesn't hurt that it's friggin' cute too. We even get more of the parent-child vibe when, Tio's talking to Merrick and he'll just like pet her head a little bit. I just thought that was the cutest thing ever and just such a lovely touch to their relationship. And of course, since this is my favorite relationship in the game, one of these two characters dies. And of course, it's the father, Merrick. Rito and Tio's screams of anguish as Merrick is killed in front of them is just soul-crushing. And of course, the loss is so devastating for Tio. She begins to question whether she ever wanted emotions in the first place. And another example of rewarding NPC dialogue, depending how you look at it, is a random villager in Merrick's village tells Tio that she believes Merrick will return home from this journey because Tio is with him. Ouch. I've spoken about all the other characters in this game, but the only one I haven't touched on is Roan. Now, Roan is the only character in this game that I didn't really have a strong attachment to. There's nothing wrong with him per se, I just didn't find him particularly appealing, but I will say I did appreciate the fact that him and Tio did seem to form a good friendship after Tio lost Merrick. I probably should have seen Merrick's death coming, but when I played this game for the first time, I really didn't. It caught me completely off guard. And as much as I was sad to lose a valuable party member, because I really did like playing as Merrick in the game, I just was devastated for Tio and the loss that she felt. And seeing his death again all these years later, and this isn't only the second time I played it, I've lost count of how many times I've played this game. It didn't make it any easier by any stretch. And it was actually harder this time because the voice actors of the voice actors of Tio and Ryudo, oh man, I could just hear the grief in their voices this time around. And it was just hard to listen to. Oh, it was awful. But I will say overall, this game, in terms of its characters, on average, it did a a bit better of a job of getting you invested in them, just because there were fewer characters and you did get to spend more time with them. But that's not to say I didn't love the characters of the original Grandia as well. Fina, Sue, Justin, etc. They're all classic characters and I love them all. And while I did touch on the Church of Grandis, I really should talk more at length about this game's two main villains. That is the Pope of the Church of Grandis, Zera, and Ryudo's big brother, Melphus. First off, Zera. Okay, with Zera, he has got to have had the worst crisis of faith I have ever seen in a video game. He handles it so poorly, he decides to replace God in his stead, and he spirals so badly that he projects his own weaknesses and flaws onto the rest of humanity. And as a result, he dooms humanity to extinction. Because of all the inherent flaws he has, he projects them onto everybody else. He believes that everybody else just has to be as rotten as he is. I gotta say, I had Zera pegged as the game's big villain pretty much as soon as we met him, even though he is nice to you when you first see him. And I will say that Grandia 2 does a much better job of getting me to hate the game's villains. And in Grandia 2, we are constantly seeing pieces of Valmar resurrected and the horrible effects they have on the citizenry. Before I talk about Melphus at large, I will say that I loved seeing all the different pieces of Valmar as they were resurrected during the course of the game and their grotesque forms they took. But more fascinating than that was the effect Valmar's possession had on the people it affected. For example, the Tongue of Valmar amplifying a person's greed, or the Eye of Valmar, which instead of revealing the flaws of its host, revealed in its stead the flaws of the people around the one it possessed. And if the other instances of Valmar's possession didn't drive home how awful it is, Ryudo's brother Melphus's possession has gotta take the cake and should serve as the poster boy for how terrible its repercussions are. Melphus was turned into an absolutely unforgivable bastard, especially when combined with the tragic state of Ryudo's village. I will say the graveyard in Ryudo's home village really amplifies the tragedy that occurred there. Each tombstone that you investigate, you're given a little bit more backstory into what occurred in Ryudo's past when Melphus is possessed, and it really amplifies the depressing mood. Ryudo and Melphus's village placed a great emphasis on attaining power. And because Melphus was such a naturally talented swordsman and the best the village had ever seen, there was a lot of pressure on him both within himself and without in order to succeed. Unfortunately, Melphus was the victim of a perfect storm. His own desire for power and success combined with the expectations of his village. And all this resulted in him making a very bad decision. Melphus wasn't an inherently bad person. It was just that his desire for good combined with his desire for power ended up costing him everything. Good intentions led to Melphus's tragedy. But unfortunately, what happened in his case is only the ends were considered and not the means. And because the means weren't considered, he allowed himself to be possessed by Valmar. And it cost him everything. I desperately wanted to save Melphus, but we can't always get what we want. And this desire on my part just served as another reminder to why I love this game so much, because it gets me emotionally invested every time I play it. Since we've talked a lot about characters and story, I think it's only fair we talk about this game's music now as well. And I won't be coy about it. This game's music is still fucking great, especially a lot of the battle tracks. Honestly, Grandia needs to come back not only for the sick gameplay, story, and characters, but for the fucking fantastic music. For example, listen to this battle track. And the end boss theme in particular is one of the best ones in an RPG. terms of music, this game also has some tracks from the original game that you get to listen to. Like, for example, when you have the arm wrestling minigame, you hear the battle theme from Grandia 1. I, to this day, still regularly listen to Grandia 1 and 2's music on a consistent basis. And with Grandia 2, in terms of English audio, it's an improvement over the original game, but if you're still not a fan, there is an option now in the Switch version, the HD collection, and the PC version to listen to Japanese audio. And now we'll end this review in roughly the same place I did the original Grandia, and that is by talking about the game's ending. I forgot how satisfying Grandia 2's ending is. We get to travel back to several locations we visited through the course of the game. We get to see how the world is improving. We find out what happens to people who were possessed by Valmar. And suitably so, Ryudo doesn't pick either Elena or Millennia to be with at the end of this game. And I gotta say, Ryudo, not having picked one or the other, good luck navigating that minefield, brother. You are gonna need it. Grandia 2, just like Grandia 1, it's beyond a score for me. It is an essential RPG experience without question, especially with the new HD version, which is the definitive version of the game. And I will say, if you are a video game collector at all, both of these games are worthy. They are both absolutely worthy to be part of your collection. And it just makes me wish that Gung Ho, who did the HD collection, would release a physical version. So if you're watching Gung Ho, I'll buy a standard version, I'll buy a limited edition version, whatever you release, I'll buy it. So please. All in all, Grandia 2 is a very worthy sequel, in my opinion, to the original game. It has some things it does better, and it has a few things it doesn't do quite as well. But having said all that, I find it incredibly difficult to pick one over the other. If I had to make a choice, I probably could, but I don't feel like making one right now, so I'm not gonna. But having said all that, it's got a special place in my heart. It's got moments in it I'll never forget, and I'm truly grateful that I've got to enjoy this game multiple times. So once again, this has been my tribute for Grandia 2, and I hope to see you all next time for another Game Break. Oh, and if you like what you see, please subscribe. Take it easy.